Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the Jegna and The Thinker. I am one of your co-hosts, Brandon Jones, and I am with my co-host, Aaron. How you doing today, man?
What's up, B? How you doing, man?
Maintaining, man, maintaining. Looking forward to today's conversation. We're talking about mental health, emotional health, Black men. Is this a hindrance to us? Is this a thing to help us? You know, some people think that this is the thing to save us. What are your thoughts, my friend?
Well, first of all, if we use that word saving Black men, I think that gives a connotation that there's something inherently wrong with us. And to me, that's a huge issue in itself. As somebody that's in therapy, has been in therapy for the last year, probably off and on for maybe like the last 9 years, I can tell Black men that it's extremely important. But I also want to talk about the reasons why Black men don't go to therapy. And I'd like to get into that as well. And I think that it's very important that we tell people we actually have a mental health professional here. And I think, Brandon, now you correct me if I'm wrong. Have you gone to therapy? Have you been in therapy yourself?
Yes, sir, I have. I told myself before becoming a clinical mental health professional, that if anybody's going to sit on the couch and tell me about their deepest, darkest secrets, I better do the same thing. So as I was in the grad school process, I went to therapy myself. I did about a year, I think 2 months of therapy. I thought I was all good. And then I became a dad. Then I had my first child, and all that stuff that I thought I dealt with came right back up, man. So it
went right out the window, huh?
Yeah, it was crazy. But it also proves that, you know, you got to always work on yourself, no matter if you go to therapy or not. Healing is a journey and not a destination, for sure.
Right. So let's get into it, man. So I'll start with the story. I remember I told one of my really, really good friends that I was going to therapy. And he said, "Man, what you going to therapy for?" Just like that.
Just like that. Yeah.
Just like that, man. Ain't nothing wrong with you. And I was like, huh. That was an interesting take, and I had to think about it. And Brandon, I can be completely honest. I know a lot of Black men. That is the connotation amongst, I'm not going to say majority. I'm not going to say majority, but I'm going to say probably 90% of Black men that are looking at therapy as something that's not necessary. There's nothing wrong with you. But my immediate pushback is, like we talk about Mr. Fuller a lot.
Right.
What are the results that you are getting in your communities and in your families?
Right.
Well, when I did that and I looked at myself, I said, I don't like some of the results I've gotten, whether it's been in relationships, child rearing, my own self-reflective on my own behavior, poor decisions, good decisions, all of that. I said, I can't fix me with me. I need a little bit of a second opinion because the way that Aaron is driving this car is not necessarily going the way it's supposed to. And I think that's one of the first things is that we, as specifically Black men, we have to be honest with ourselves. And we have to be honest about everything that we're looking at and everything that we're seeing. And I know that's pretty difficult because dealing with yourself, specifically in this kind of environment with racism, with just everything that we have to deal with, the patriarchy, we're all of these different terms that we'll get into, it's kind of hard because you really have to be honest about like where you really, really are. And so that was the thing. That's originally why I got into therapy. But what really, really helped me was and I want to be completely transparent, as transparent as I can. The first time that I got into therapy, I had specifically white therapists. And I can tell you, there was a disconnect.
Yeah.
In how they were even communicating with me. Brandon, I think you'll like this. They had, every therapist I went through, I would walk in and sit on the couch. And before I got to my therapist that I've been with now for a year, they would have on their desk, what do y'all call that book? The DSM book?
Yeah. The Diagnostic Statistical Manual of Mental Health Disorders. Yeah.
It would be strategically placed like right in front of me. And I'm like, why y'all got this book right here? I'm like, why is this book right here? I'm like, why is this book right here? And I found that weird, but it took me through a couple of therapists, and then I actually started going to a Black female, maybe beginning of probably middle of 2019, and that was really, really constructive, really, really helpful. She gave me a lot of tactics and strategies on how I'm looking at not necessarily life, but how I'm looking at myself, and that was really, really helpful. And then I have a Black male therapist, which has really, really been impactful and really helped me. But it's all about the honesty, and really, I think that some of the dysfunctional things that we like to call normal in our families, we can't solve them. And I think you're going to talk about this a little bit, but at least we can learn how to deal with them, even individually, if we get a little bit of therapy to find out, to get a little background about, okay, this is why I behave like this. But man, when I look at it, granddaddy and mama kind of behave like this too.
Right.
Yeah. So that's my experience. So I just wanted to kind of open up with that. So what's been your experience? Actually, why do you think as a mental health professional, specifically for Black men, that therapy is so important?
Well, I think it's important because it's an avenue that forces us to deal with our emotional health. And I say emotional health strategically and not necessarily our mental health. I separate those two things.
Okay.
And I do that because of how I was trained as a clinician. I was trained. There's a new version of that book you were talking about, that big blue book, the
Yeah, I don't like
DSM.
that book, man.
So I was at the cuffs of that newer version, DSM-5 and the DSM-4 IV. And in the old DSM, the DSM-4, there was these axes. There was axis 1 and axis 2 diagnosis. And axis 1 are mental health disorders, but they're not like what's called serious pristine mental illnesses like schizophrenia and things like that, which we do have Black men who do have those types of serious pristine mental illnesses. So when I think of mental health, I kind of split them in two, but then I kind of split them in tiers in that first one, because there's something called adjustment disorders, and most people don't know this. They go to therapists, they just assume that they have depression or anxiety, and people do a lot of self-diagnosing, but they don't. A lot of therapists don't even tell you what you have unless you need to go see a psychiatrist or get a psych evaluation, and then But most people don't.
Wait, Brandon, hold on. Back that up. What you just said. You said that they won't even tell you what you have. Why? Let's talk about Black men. Is there?
Yeah.
You got an opinion, and you might have maybe you have a statistical reason. Why is it that some people are not given the correct information upon those initial consultations, maybe?
I think a lot of therapists are uncomfortable talking to people about what their actual diagnoses are. I think that they'd rather just stay in the moment with the person and help them problem solve with whatever's going on right now, and not necessarily say like, hey, I think you have generalized anxiety disorder, and this is what this means. They'll say, you seem very anxious about things. Tell me about X, Y, and Z. How's work going? How's that relationship with your parents or your children or whatever? They'll stay in the moment, but they won't actually talk to people about like what you got. And I encourage folks who are watching this, if you've gone to a therapist, ask yourself, do you know what your actual diagnosis was that they gave you, or diagnoses? Because sometimes you can get multiples. And a lot of people don't know, which is crazy. I've had so many clients where they've seen the therapist prior to me, and then I'll seek their medical records, like if they have what's called a diagnostic assessment, or also known as a DA. So anytime you go to a therapist, usually those first session or two is taken to do a diagnostic assessment, which is really just gathering a lot of history, getting to learn about you, and then they're able to make a clinical judgment based on what you've told them on where you may be with an actual diagnosis. That's why that big blue book that you've seen was there, because they're using that as kind of like a playbook and a guide to kind of determine where you fit within that book as far as the diagnosis that you have. But what I've noticed is a lot of folks don't know. There's I don't want to say never, but it's very rare that a therapist will circle back and say, okay, based on your diagnostic assessment, this is what we landed on. Okay, you have this, and this, or this is what I'm thinking. That doesn't always happen. And for Black folks, I think since that doesn't happen, we just go on thinking I'm just stressed out or I'm just crazy. Like we're usually extreme on how we feel about what's going on.
Either I'm crazy or I don't know what I'm doing, or
right.
You're right. Now I got a question for you, because we're gonna have a conversation today talking about Black men. That DSM book, I could be wrong, Brandon, was not designed to critically look at me in a good contextual manager, in a good context manner. So was
Right.
that the entire system was not really designed to look at me in a critical manner. How do you, as a mental health professional, use something that and you correct me, I'm saying it might be inherently broken in a manner, in a
Right.
small way. How do you, as a Black therapist, take the DSM and the critical thinking and then the things you learn and apply that to Black men, knowing that in some ways this is flawed? Does that make sense, the question that I'm
Yeah,
asking?
absolutely. Yes, it does. So for me, I always go with what I know first, and then
Okay.
I make my clinical assessment or judgment based on what's going on. I'm a big proponent of understanding the environments that people are in and the environments that people have been in the past. So, I always use the perspective of worldview, like what's brought this client or this person to this particular perspective of life or situation that they're dealing with, and then base that on, and then kind of counter that with the DSM knowledge to say, okay, this is where they kind of fit. Now, there's sometimes where people, it's just obvious somebody has a more serious, pristine mental illness, and they might need some further assistance, maybe medication or something of that nature. But typically, I'm looking at like culture. So if I get a Black man, I'm thinking, okay, where are you from, man? Are you from Philly? Okay, I know a little bit about Philly. I know you got to be
Okay.
rough. I know that tri-state area. Then I'll ask like, okay, how old are you? Okay, you're 32 years old, so that means that you grew up in the 90s and the early 2000s. What was going on during that time period for Black men? How were you adjusting during that time period?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then I asked some things about their history. Okay, tell me about your parents. Oh, your parents split up and you were in foster care. Okay, interesting. Now all I'm doing, I'm asking questions. I'm getting this person to tell their narrative, but also at the same time, I'm checking for particular things that may hint me at what's going on with this individual. So if they talk about like I'm just using a metaphorical person here. All right, they've been to foster care. What do we know about foster care? We know that a lot of people who go through foster care have attachment issues because they're not with their biological parents, or they've had stints with them and without them. They may have had some trauma. There's definitely some stress because you're not with that nucleus. They may have siblings that they've been detached from, and they may have siblings who've been in foster care. So now I'm thinking these are all different types of cultural contexts, issues that are going on that are impacting this person's thought process, their behaviors, and how they feel. And then I'll ask some other questions. Tell me about your dating life. Tell me about, do you have any children? How has work been? So I'm really collecting a history, but also composing that to what's in the DSM, and kind of finding out where does this person kind of fit. I never go into a situation and think that I know exactly what's wrong with somebody.
Right, right,
Even
right.
after I make the diagnosis, I'm still keeping that curiosity, because clients don't always tell you everything. And
Yeah, you're
and
right
and,
about
ther-
that.
and the therapists who watch this, they'll know that you'll get to like session 6 with the person, which means you've been seeing them for like a month, maybe 2 months or so, and then
Right,
they
right,
just
right.
drop something. And you're like, damn, like why you didn't tell me this at the beginning? Because it's like that's significant, right?
Right, but they're
And
working through it too.
but
They're working through their
exactly.
own truth too. Right, right, right.
Exactly. So it's important as clinicians and as people who just help people to not just take, your first diagnosis or your first swing at it and say, okay, that's what's wrong, but always be curious to say, okay, there may be other things going on with this person. So, it's important to understand that whenever you're as a mental health professional, whenever I'm analyzing what's happening in somebody's life, I'm always keeping that kind of that optimism that there may be something else there going on, and I don't just close the book on them and think that it's that. Now, specifically for Black men, I know that this world, I'm not a fool to this world and how much stress, racial battle fatigue that Black men go through. I always keep that in mind too. So that actually informs how I ask my questions to my clients. So if I say, tell me about work, and they're like, man, I've been in and out of jobs for quite some time. I've never had a good relationship with any of my bosses or supervisors. I've worked warehouse jobs my whole life. They're saying stuff like that. I'm like, okay, how did you deal with that? Like, your money's coming in and out. You may be getting fired. You're dealing with people that you might not like you, or they trying to play you. Tell me about that experience as a Black man, because I have some cultural context to kind of understand it, but it's up to the
Right.
client to kind of, logically go through that process and let me know how it actually works. So it's important to understand who your clients are and what they've kind of gone through, because it helps you make better clinical assessments.
Yeah, that's important because I know that I can, and so I'm on the show, so I can use myself. I can use myself as an example. But when I was at certain jobs, when I had certain jobs previously, I was trying to just fit in, and I was just trying to be the quiet black guy, and not be myself. And I was doing harm to my own, the way that I viewed myself, because inherently I know that this is not who I am. And I can tell you that there's a lot of black men specifically to where we just get along to get along. And here's the thing, I understand why we do it, because a lot of it is a survival tactic.
Right.
A lot of it is just to survive, whether it's in corporate America, whether it's in business, whether it's in relationships. We're just trying to get along. The problem is that us just getting along is doing more harm to ourselves than helping our communities and things of that nature. My question for you flat out is that, do all black men living in this system called the United States have some level of trauma? That's a flat out question, Brandon.
I'm gonna give you a flat out answer. Yes, I would say yeah. My short answer is yes. Okay. My long answer is, why is that? You know, there's a reason why you had that experience and you just wanted to be that quiet black man and get through your 9 to 5, get that paycheck and try to live a happy life. Where did you learn that from? Like, were you told that by any other black men or by a black woman? No. Inherently, you felt like that's how you needed to survive. Now, I know a little bit about you, and I know you've had some corporate background. I know you've had just the regular old job stuff that everybody else has as well. But probably in all those environments, you tried to do the same thing.
Yeah, I just get along to get along. And now I'm just like, man, that'll be me. But I always didn't have the confidence to do that. And I had to ask myself why. And then I began to look at all my previous experiences, even growing up, my classroom experiences, like being in elementary school. I had a teacher, shout out to Miss Rosenblum, great teacher. She was one of the first teachers that I ever had that even allowed me and said, I remember she said in front of the class, Aaron is one of the smartest kids in here, but he doesn't apply himself. But it was important for her to say that, because I always knew, okay, I'm pretty smart. I'm just not trying, but I'm pretty smart. All my other classroom environments that I got in, black teachers or white, later on after that, it was always get along, do your work, be quiet. I wasn't really allowed to have a voice. And then that kind of worked on my confidence. And I see a lot of brothers out there that are like that in corporate environments, to where you want to say something. You might be the smartest person in the room and you might have some great ideas, but not only are you looking at it from a self-confidence standpoint, but you also don't think that you have a value, because let's be honest. Yeah, I'm in banking, dude. I am typically the only black face in a room. Typically. I mean, typically. So I don't care what anybody says. That can wear on you. Now, my self-confidence is a little bit higher, so I'm able to express myself. But think about the impact that I could have had and done things in my career differently if I would have opened my mouth 20 years ago, Brandon. Right. And those are just different trauma. Let's just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, that is trauma. People don't think of it because we're not talking about sexual abuse or
you're not getting hit over the head.
We're not talking about anything like that. But it is traumatic because psychologically you are suppressing yourself to fit inside of an environment. And the crazy part was, no one told you to do it. Culturally, we have adapted.
Right there, y'all. Yes, that right there. Y'all, everybody needs to rewind that. Nobody told me to suppress myself. I inherently suppress my own behavior. Right. Which is insane, but that's what insanity is. Go ahead.
Absolutely. No, you're right. Because that is insane. That is insane to a certain extent, because you are not able to develop health in a healthy manner by doing that. That causes unnecessary stress that you've had since you were in elementary school. Like, think about that. No one taught you to do that, but you knew at an early age, just inherently, and we could talk about epigenetics if we want, that this is an environment where I'm not supposed to express myself to who I am, because there may be some sort of punishment that comes. I mean, it's just like when we think about animals and how animals adapt to their environments, humans do the same thing. So when we talk about black men and we talk about our most or all black men traumatized just based on that. And we don't have to talk about Emmett Till. We don't have to go down that road of just the
Right.
horrendous things that have happened to understand the psychological impacts that black men have to deal with. And it's not surprising to hear things like black boy joy. Like that's one of the memes or the terms that we've heard over the last probably like 6 to 8 years, is
Right.
like we just need to have joy, but it's a lot more than that. And it's not, and also the call for black boy joy is on men. We need men to have joy. We don't have to be boys
Right.
to have
Right.
joy.
Yeah,
But
see that men can have joy too, not just boys.
yeah, but we're not supposed to, right?
Right.
Because in this society, in the Western Hemisphere, our functionality from the beginning was physicality and sexuality.
That
we
is
were
very
here.
true.
We were here to work and be laborers and to fornicate and produce more laborers. So psychologically, as we develop over time, we hold that same space. That there's no there in that fornicating and physicality. There's no intellectualism in there. You're not supposed to think, talk, be smart, learn how to read, teach anybody anything, be nurturing. You're supposed to use your body, shut your mouth, and keep moving for someone else's benefit. And unfortunately, we have developed with that kind of unconscious understanding of how black men should be. And the crazy part about this, and I don't know how deep we want to get into it, but not we have accepted that, but so have our women in our community. So we function in that manner.
Period. In our relationships, we function like
bingo.
You know what, Bandit? It's fresh on my brain, so I can bring it up. Did you see the Tiger? Did you see the Tiger documentary?
No. What? Oh, Tiger Woods?
Yeah, Tiger
no,
Woods.
No. I haven't seen it. No.
Okay, so I'm gonna let the cat out of the bag. So I watched it already. But there's a part, obviously, so they're talking about all these relationships he's had with all these women, him cheating on his wife, all these things. He returned to the Masters in 2010. And whatever this guy's name is that runs the Masters or the Augusta Club, y'all, anybody watching this could correct me. I don't know his name. I don't want to give him no clout either. He sat down and had a press conference and specifically talked about Tiger Woods being a disappointment and not being a role model to golfers worldwide. Brandon, I'm pretty smart. There was about, let's say there was 50 people in the room. Yeah. You're a professional, not me. Let's say 40 of those men were married. Did anybody in that room other than Tiger Woods have an affair?
Most likely.
Most likely, right? I guarantee you that guy would not do a press conference chastising those men on their behavior.
Right.
And as I'm looking at that, I'm like, is what Tiger Woods did incorrect? Absolutely. However, the sexualization of him in that particular moment, I was like, that's a black guy right there.
Yes.
And that's a sexualized black man because he ain't the first guy in that room that has made poor decisions. But you want to make an example out of him because he won a bunch of tournaments. Where's your standard about everybody else in that room other than him? Just because he's on TV and it went public, you're making it sound like nobody else in that room. You ain't get caught. That's what we're talking about. But when you said that, the sexualization, he was perfect, but it just so, but man, we could go into, but he was a perfect guy. Yes. Tiger was perfect.
Yep.
But in that moment, when they found out he had sexual infidelity, specifically with their women, they made a public spectacle of him, Brandon.
Yeah.
A spectacle. And I've never seen that I've never seen that. No, I'm like, you run a golf club.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. We're talking about one of the most decorated golfers of all time. And we have a guy who runs a club who's probably, wealthy in his own right to own his own golf club and do that.
Yes.
But he's not the father of Tiger Woods. Like, why would you even chastise him? And then to do it publicly is a whole nother thing. But again, that is the functionality of Black men, is always in this childlike state. So when we're talking about mental health and therapy for
Right
Black
there.
men,
That's right there. Right there.
we
Right
have
there. Yep.
we have
Yep.
to keep moving. Like, it's hard for us to keep moving forward when it comes to social power and dynamics, where we're always placed in this childlike state. So when we intellectualize, when we start to develop and mature ourselves and we get into manhood, it becomes a problem for people. And I'm not saying that cheating is a function of manhood, but
No,
hell,
not at
let's be
all. Not at
honest.
all.
Most professional athletes have a lot of sexual conquest because they have a lot more access. They're more desirable. Their bodies are more fit. They have more financials. That increases. And if we're gonna keep it honest, athletics and a part of that entertainment industry has a huge sex component in it. That's why when
100%.
people get recruited, you take them to the college. Next thing you know, they got some girls waiting for you at the
What was
dorm
that?
or at the hotel or whatever. That's true. That's
Wait, look.
I've
What
been
movie
there.
was it? What movie was that? Ray Allen. He got game.
Oh, He
What was
Got
that? He
Game.
got game.
He Got Game is not a movie. That is reality. That happens. And that happened. And
100%.
I was a really good football player, but I wasn't like a blue chip athlete or anything. That stuff happens. They'll have them waiting for you. And it's like this stuff, this is not uncommon. But again, most that happens to a lot of that happens to all athletes, but think about the Black male, because we can get him hooked if we give him sexual pleasure, because he's not thinking, let me come to this school, let me achieve and get a degree. Let me show him what kind of women we have on display here. Let me give him a couple $1,000 and let me take him to a fancy dinner, because that's all he's gonna want to come perform on our campus. Now that's just athletics. Let's talk about the Black men who don't have athletic,
Yeah.
scholarships and
Yeah.
abilities like that. It's still that same idea. We're going to entertain you with these trinkets and these things, Mr. Fuller, trinkets,
Mm-hmm.
that get you connected to thinking about this is something of value. So even so what I'm saying is this, I'm comparing this, when we are in the social power dynamic and we are kind of always in this childlike state, we'll give you objects to keep you entertained and engaged, because that's all you want anyway.
Mm-hmm.
That weighs on a Black man's spirit and soul, because as we go through functioning in the world and we want more than just access to women or fancy and shiny things, then we're looked at like, what are you're tripping, like you're doing too much. You
Right.
shouldn't have a voice. You're not smart. Like, there's all these components to it that Black men get chastised for maturing, and that weighs on our mental and emotional health, because then we start to ask ourselves, am I crazy? Like, what is going on
Yeah.
that I have to deal with this stuff all the time, when we just kind of quote unquote buck the system and we don't go with kind of the narratives that have been pushed for us.
Right. And the reason I didn't want to get too far off track, because somebody's gonna be like, why Aaron bring up Tiger Woods? But the reason I thought about that is because when I watched it, the only thing I could think about, Brandon, as I said, this guy wanted to dominate this sport his whole life. He wanted to be accepted. He wanted to be included. And the moment he made a poor decision, like you said, daddy smacked him on the hand.
Exactly.
Not his own father.
Right.
Not his own father. But daddy smacked him on the hand. Man, I'm a basketball fan.
Yeah.
I've seen David Stern say things about NBA players. I've never seen that. He might be, hey, I'm disappointed. He made a poor decision and he's to be held accountable. But talk about you're a role model and all this other foolishness. Like, that was just crazy to me. Getting back to the trauma aspect of it.
Yeah.
How responsible, and this is something that I've been learning, and I kind of want you to delve into this. So, trauma and dealing with mental health, I have learned that I am accountable for my decisions, the good ones and the bad ones.
Yeah.
I am who I am because of my good decisions that I've made and my poor decisions that I've made. They make up who I am. The other thing I am learning, Brandon, is that my environment that was created, whether I had something to do with it or not, also has a lot of part of the development.
Correct. As
Black men, sometimes, how do I say this? Sometimes I don't think we take enough responsibility for some of these environments that we help to that we are consciously helping to create because of our poor decisions. So, for example, when I hear people talk about I hear Black men talking about Black women, and I don't want to bring up Black women, but Black women talking, I'm trying to make sure I say this correctly. Black women being single mothers, That is not happening by accident.
Right. They ain't going to sperm banks.
That is not happening by accident.
Right.
So
right.
if you guys are procreating it and attempting to create a life, and that gentleman leaves willingly, that gentleman needs to have some accountability on why he left this current situation and has no interaction with the child. Not just the fact that the mom is a single mom. I also think that some of these men are leaving these situations because of trauma.
Absolutely.
So can we kind of talk about how mental health affects interrelate, how Black men mental health affects our interactions with not only with our children, but also with our male-female relationship? I thought I just gave you a lot.
Yeah, you did. It's okay. So, when you don't develop emotional maturity, what I mean by that is the ability to kind of not just process your emotions, but deal with them as well. Because you can't dictate how you feel, but you can dictate what you do with those feelings.
Right.
One of the things that I utilize in my practice and just most of my work is something called social emotional intelligence. So it's emotional intelligence is what people mostly know it for, but the social element you can't leave out, especially when you're talking about Black folks. But social emotional intelligence, the way that I define it, I actually borrowed from Dr. Francis Cress Welsing, and it's the ability to process and deal with your emotions, your thoughts, speech, actions, perception, and emotional response. And for Black men, we have not been conditioned to handle our social and emotional intelligence very well. And since that's the case due to trauma, since that is the case, when it comes to handling things that bring up a lot of emotions, anxieties, things of that nature, we tend to flee. So when it comes to being in relationship or when it comes to parenting, it's easy for us to leave because culturally we've adapted a principle of acceptance for that. It's okay for Black men to leave. Back in the 40s, the 50s, and the 60s, and part of the 70s, it wasn't okay for Black men.
That
to
was
just
unacceptable.
leave.
Absolutely.
Right. Yep. You still had to take care of the family, even if you went out and built another family on the other side of town. You was taking care of both sides. You was taking care of both sides.
That's
right.
Because
we had a cultural standard that didn't allow Black men to just dip. Now, did some Black men leave? Sure, absolutely, stuff happened, but there was still more of a cultural, like I said, standard or boundary to say, hey, no, you're gonna take care of this woman and that woman, and they're gonna be the Johnsons on both sides of the family, the East Side and the West Side Johnsons. Right. Now, something happened where it became a lot more acceptable for men to just dip out. So now where we're at today, fast forward 40 plus years later, here we are where it's okay for a Black man to get a woman pregnant and not be with her. And guess what? Even Black women accept it. It's like, it's my child. That's
another thing. Absolutely.
It's my child. Right. And then we get into, I'm going to take care of this baby no matter what. And it's like, culturally, we just let loose the reins, and that's where we're at today. But when it comes to trauma, when it comes to mental health and emotional health, we haven't developed our emotional maturity to maintain in them stressful situations. So it's a combination of things from my standpoint, because I tell you that I've been married now for 9 years. I have 2 children. There have been times where I wanted to dip, man. Like, I'm just like, this is just too much. Like, I don't want, like, I can do, I mean, we even have sayings, I can do bad on my own. I can do better by myself. Like, we say these things because that's a reality. And, but I have sworn an oath pretty much to being in this through thick or thin for the betterment of my children and for the betterment of myself. So when things get tough, I don't just dip out. I try to figure out, and I have to deal with that emotional process to maintain. Being in a marriage or just a long-term relationship is hard, man. People change, boundaries get crossed, expectations don't get communicated, stuff happens. And it's easy for us to just jet, but you shouldn't do that. Like, you should try to stick it out if you can. Now, there are times where you do need to leave a situation, absolutely. But at least if there's a goal in mind. And again, I think one of the things that has happened for us is we've gotten away from really cultivating our children, is how I term it, but being there for our kids, and we become more selfish as people. So we just take care of our own needs and we just say, F them kids. And I've heard Black men say that, like, I don't care, like, I'm out. And that's not good. Like, you stick through because you want them kids to have a healthy opportunity and a long lasting thing. And unfortunately, we have gotten so toxic in our male female dynamics due to trauma, and then we end up trauma bonding with people and having sex with them when we haven't even developed a relationship, that kids get born. And then that's when Dr. Francis Wilson comes in and says, when you play with sex, the joke is on the
Joke is an
offspring.
offspring, 100%, man.
That is a traumatic thing that happens over and over and over in our community that has unfortunately become a cultural norm. So for us as Black men, we have to be able to develop our emotional maturity, our mental health, to a certain extent, where we can stick it through and be more intentional with our phalluses too. That's another thing
Right,
too. Is like,
right.
we just slanging pipe everywhere, and then, things are gonna happen. Things are gonna happen, and I don't want to get, because I know in our pro-Black circles, we can say things like, well, sex is about, procreating. It's not just about procreating. Sex is mainly about pleasure if you really think about it. But procreation is the tool that you use to build societies.
Right.
So pleasure and procreation are the two components of sex. If you want pleasure, there are ways to protect yourself where you do not breed and not bring in children. But for us, it's just like, it doesn't matter. So we don't be so intentional all the time with what we do with our phallus. We just slang it and boom, what happens, happens, and we move on to the next one. We have to break that conditioning, and a lot of that has to do with us dealing with our trauma.
Yeah, and I can say for myself, so a lack of discipline was one of the things that I definitely have struggled with and things of that nature. And I'm okay in saying that because I can look around me and see other men and they're suffering with the same thing too.
Right.
You're just dealing with it a little bit differently. And
Right.
so I think in relationships, man, something you brought up in reference to male, female, just the dynamic and us as men being more responsible. I had to look at the fact of, because I made poor decisions and I disrupted my family dynamic. Period.
Mhm.
I did that. I had to look at not only why did I make those decisions, but what was it about me that was even, how did my journey start? Like,
Right.
Dr. Wilson used to always say this, a 5-month-old baby does not imagine that they're 18, that they are running around with a gun in their hand, sticking up a liquor
Right.
store.
Right.
And that's not saying, and somebody's going to get on here. I know what the comments are going to be. You guys are talking bad about Black men. We're not saying that.
No.
But if you look at the media, which is what everybody's watching, that's what you would think Black men are in the first place.
Right.
So I don't care if it's a crime, you're dysfunctional, you have addictions or anything of that nature. We need to be looking at as men, how did we get here? Because my goal is healthy relationships. And healthy relationships start with men, us as men, looking at things we can do better. I don't necessarily think healthy relationships is staying away from women.
No.
I don't think that that's what it's going to be. And I hear those talking points too.
Go MGTOW.
Yeah, just run away from them. Nah, man,
Right.
I love ladies and women are beautiful. Shout out to my baby. But we have to figure out healthy ways to establish relationships, but that doesn't happen if we as Black men are not healthy. One of the things that has really helped me, that my friends have always, one of my really good friends has told me, as a Black man, everything is your responsibility that is within your circle. So if it's your family, that's your responsibility. If things are going bad, it's a reflection of you. If things are going good, it's a reflection of you. If it's your relationship, if things are going well in your relationship, whatever that means, it's a reflection of you. You have to look internally. That doesn't mean that the young lady or the young man or whoever you're dealing with is not doing something wrong. Right. But from a mental health standpoint, you also have to say, what am I allowing negatively to go on wrong? Absolutely. What am I allowing to come in here? So I just wanted to kind of get that, is that we just have to be healthier versions of Black men. Let's go back to something in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Black men, my buddy telling me, I don't know why you're going to therapy.
Yeah.
Why don't we feel safe in these therapy spaces?
Yeah. Well, one, they were not created for us. Like, we got to keep it real.
Right. That goes all the way back to the middle. Right.
These therapy spaces were never created for us. Traditionally talk therapy was created for affluent white men who wanted to deal with the deeper subconscious and talk to one another about things.
Can you dig into that a little bit? The history of that?
Well, but
not the history, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So when it came to talk therapy, it was more of an affluent academic type of exercise that is changing forms over time through various different civilizations and things. But it wasn't for the common folk. What was for the common folk was what's called asylums. So if you did have mental health issues, they would lock you up. Like it was just like mental health prison. And they would do when it comes to Black African folks, enslaved Africans, and I'll talk about this hemisphere more specifically. When it came to testing and understanding the brain, we were more like guinea pigs and test subjects, where they would do psychological things to us, test out different theories and all these machines on enslaved Africans, just like they did everything. Dentists did this, medical doctors, gynecologists. We were literally just like human bodies that were just at people's display to test. Now, so that's one thing we got to keep in mind, is that this stuff was never designed to help intervene and help, enslaved Africans, which were then called Negroes, be, get to mental wellness so they can move forward and become great citizens. This is not what it was. So you compose that disposition of mental health therapy, and you fast forward a few decades later, and we just talk about how the medical system developed. What ended up happening was that experimentation on us continued. And we can talk about Tuskegee, we can talk about forced sterilization, all those things. So that creates the quote unquote stigma in our community when it comes to trusting medical systems. Now, over time, mental health therapy has become more Western medical model, and we have an influx of insurance companies. So now when insurance companies come in, we have to have more parameters and structures and things of that nature. And now we have ethics as well. You can't just do stuff to people without it being certified and justified and things of that nature. But what happens? Black folks we're some of the least insured people in this country. So we can't get that help. We don't have access due to financial reasons and insurance capabilities. So then we fast forward a little longer. We get on state insurance, or we get a job and we get insurance, etc. But now you don't have enough Black providers or people who have the cultural context. This therapy was standardized on affluent white folks. It wasn't even for middle class or poor white folks. So that cultural paradigm is missing in the therapeutic practices. Even if you go back and look at any therapeutic understanding, Gestalt therapy, Adlerian, Freudian, psychoanalytic, all that stuff, it's really based on white men's thought processes. Well, we know people think different. White men think differently
and their experiences and their entire cultural experience is very different.
Very different. So all these things that are normed in the psychology world are really normed on one type of person. So we got to be very mindful of that when we think about therapy. So I'm not going to feel comfortable going to something that doesn't speak to my existence. And I know that when I have come into this space, people have disappeared. That there have been Black people who they have gone to, they call the ambulance. It's like in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. Like, call the ambulance. Cousin Ronnie going crazy. Next thing you know, you don't even see him again. Like, he gone. Like, they done took this man. Like that's reality. They done took this man to the big house, and then we ain't seen Cousin Ronnie since. Like, so this stuff happens. Or, mom might be having a mental health crisis in the 70s and 80s, might be having an issue. Here comes Child Protection Services, and now your baby's is gone, and you just needed some intervention. So there is real things that have happened to us, and we've seen in the community that make us distrust mental health, because we don't want our children taken. We don't want to be labeled. We don't want that to block our ability to get jobs or live in buildings and apartments and things of that nature. Because if you could get labeled as somebody who has an issue or you crazy, then you get looked at funny, not just by the system and other people, but also by us. Like, think about some of the things we say about people who have schizophrenia, bipolar disorder in our own community. A lot of those people end up homeless. They bounce from cousin house to mama house to uncle house, and the next thing you know, they on the streets because it's hard to deal with. So in our community, when it comes to Black men going to therapy, there are a lot of things that have been very negative experiences that lead us to giving it a side eye. Like, I don't know if I really want to mess with this because this has caused harm, and I don't know what this is going to lead me to go to. Now, we are in 2021 and beyond, right? So moving forward, that always doesn't happen, but we still have that genetic memory of those negative things that have taken place when it comes to interfacing with this situation. Another thing that I want to mention is, in this mental health space, we have to be honest about the makeup of it. It's mostly white women. Okay, these are the folks who are going and getting those master's degrees in social work and licensed professional counselors and marriage and family therapists and all that. It's mostly white women. white women have traditionally been harmful to black men. If we keep it honest and real, historically, white women have been a danger. So when I show up and you're asking me to sit in a couch behind a closed door and tell you about all these things that have happened to me, I'm still thinking, I hope this woman don't think I'm going to touch her. I hope she don't think I'm going to say something crazy.
And that
I don't know
definitely is
what
a
she's
thing.
writing down.
That definitely is a thing. Because I remember my first experience. That was, I said, I wonder how she's in taking some of these things that I'm saying.
Right.
It definitely, I can't lie and say that wasn't, and that's why I want to. I'm like, this didn't feel like a safe space. I want someone to not. I want someone that's going to sit there with me and look at me as I'm human and not be digesting me as, is he one of these monsters or whatever?
Right.
And it doesn't even mean that I did anything wrong. But if
Right.
I'm confessing certain experiences that I might have had, oh, who, you know what I'm saying? Just how they ingest things is different. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very real. And as somebody who's on the other side of it, there's two
Right.
things that I want people to know about. There's something that's called supervision, which all mental health therapists go through until you can reach a certain level where you don't need to be supervised by anybody, but you can
Okay.
still get additional supervision. And then there's something called case consultation, which is when therapists come together and they kind of strategize and talk about like people that they're working with. There might be a difficult family or a difficult person or actual diagnosis. So these are things that happen in the therapy world. Man, I've been doing mental health therapy on a clinical level since 2013.
Okay.
And I'll tell you this, I work with plenty, mostly white women, but plenty of folks. And the things that white women think and their biases and the stuff that happens about their black clients, especially their black men, I would be concerned referring people to certain women because it's like they're already assuming that you are psychotic, that you are aggressive, that you have post-traumatic stress disorder. Like they have these big ass ideas, and I'm sitting here thinking like, oh, that's just regular black man shit. Like it ain't this big thing where like, this person is a beast and a monster. Like this is just something that black men go through. I'll tell you, it's trauma. I'll tell you one quick story. It hurts my heart because this is a black woman who did this. She was an older black woman. Um, and man, I just thinking about it this frustrates me because we got into a back and forth because she was supervising a project that I was a part of, and she was coming in kind of midstream through the project. So I'm having a conversation with me and about three other people. We're having a conversation and telling her about our clients. And she's automatic. And these guys were guys who were on probation. These are young kids, actually. Let me just back up. These are 13, even though we didn't have a 13-year-old, but the program was for 13 to 17-year-olds.
Okay.
These young men are on juvenile probation.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're trying to set up therapeutic supports for all of them because part of the program was they were going to get what's called case management. So somebody who works with them one-on-one, they check in with them twice a week, etc. And then we wanted to have therapy groups where they had a place to come to and process what's going on in their little adolescent brains. And then we wanted to set them up with either one-on-one therapy or family therapy, depending on how they were, their situation was.
Mm-hmm.
So she comes in and she just assumes that all these boys are psychotic and like all these boys.
Psychotic.
Yes,
That's a big word, Brandon. Psychotic.
yeah, like they're literally out of their mind. Like they can't maintain, they can't. She pretty much was saying they're dangerous to society. And what I was trying to explain to her was, yes, they're on probation, but all their probation violations aren't something violent. Some of them were violent things, but she just made a judgment based off our conversation that all these kids were toting weapons, causing, shooting up the place pretty much. And that was her thought process. So she's thinking that they all have oh my God, I'm blanking on it. So it's pretty much antisocial personality disorder. So they're all harms to other people. And what I was trying to tell her was, no, some of these kids just got caught up in situations that led them to be on probation. So they kept stealing, or they might have stole a car or something like that. It doesn't mean that they want to just cause harm and they disconnected from society. But in this woman's mind, that's where she went to first. Now, this was a black woman, and she's been a therapist longer than I was alive at that time. And it was just like, damn, she's so clinical and she's so stuck in that book that automatically she's assuming that these folks are, these young kids are these like harms to society, and they're not. We should be rehabilitating these young men because they made poor choices and they still have time to move forward. But in her mind, she was pretty much just saying, let's just maintain them because they're probably going to end up going to prison anyway. Now, she didn't say that, but that's typically the track that ends up happening for a lot of men who end up with that diagnosis.
So I'll ask my next direct question. Why is it that we want to look at, because you and I, we know that Philippe, I'll just use Philippe always says, nothing is wrong with you. Something happened to you. So I'll use that term. If these environments, we go back to what we just said in the beginning, if the environments that are created are producing these results, why is the focus so much on the individual and less on the environments that are creating these because I'm talking about, we can make this race neutral. We can make it race neutral.
Let's do that.
Race neutral. Your environment that you come from can help alter your behavior. The environment itself. If these children are coming from dysfunctional environments that were created, why is the focus always on, like you said, these psychotic children, and that how did these environments get created, and what can we do to dismantle? It's the one thing I want to talk to you about, and I don't think I'm going to talk about it today, but it's the R. Kelly thing. It's the R. Kelly thing. Everybody wants to talk about how bad R. Kelly got, but everybody wants to talk about how bad R. Kelly is. But nobody wants to talk about what environments, the people and everything that happened around him that created R. Kelly. Because at one time, R. Kelly was a baby sitting in the crib with a bottle and was thinking about, I can play music. R. Kelly did not see himself being this person. So let's talk about that a little bit if you can.
And just to follow up on the R. Kelly point, and then I'm gonna dive a little deeper into this. Not only was it the environments that created R. Kelly, but also maintained it. Can't lose sight of that. Because R. Kelly, this wasn't a one-off. R. Kelly did what he did long-term, and there were people who knew, and there are people who turned a blind eye and accepted it to either have status, fame, financial access, or whatever, and just let it go on.
Yeah.
So it's important to understand that what's happening in our environments isn't a one-off. It's also maintained. So we have to question, why is that? Why do we accept the standard that's creating the dysfunction in our communities? Part of the answer, and this is definitely going to be a whole nother podcast that we're going to have to dig deeper into, because I'm about to say something kind of controversial. Part of it is because men don't maintain our community. Okay. In most communities, this is why people complain about patriarchy, because men oppose environments, which means that they can dictate what happens in the environments. Women are great facilitators, organizers, gatherers, and I hate to say maintenance, but they maintain environments. Men oppose them, right? They protect them, they produce, etc. That's been the natural functionality of males and females from eons ago. If you look at any anthropology and they talk about gender, that's what they're talking about across the world. Now, there's different ways that people do it culturally, but that's what happens. In Black America, it's ass backwards. And sometimes the men ain't even involved. That's the crazy part about it. And we have to be honest about that if we really want to answer the question of why don't we look at our environment? Because when we look at our environment, it reveals an ugly truth. We are out of our social order. Okay? What I mean by that is, and this doesn't mean that women can't have power. I'm not saying any of that, because I know that's where people go. What are you trying to say?
Look, Brady, you about to get a reaction video right now.
That's all good. I need it. I'm trying to get some of that. I'm trying to get some of that Kevin Samuels clout. You know what I'm saying? No, I just. but it's the truth. We literally, our social order is off kilter. So and it was deliberately done like this 400 years ago when Africans were captured during war on the continent, brought over, or we want to say Black people were already here. Irregardless, when we got into that system
the results
of slavery, what ended up happening was we ended up having our social order being completely twisted and turned upside down, like the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. Now, what ends up happening with that is this. Since that happens, Black men don't have a disposition on what our role is in the community. So we just individually just function and just go, it's very haphazard. If you look at a lot of Black boys, and they don't know what they want to do. Ask a Black boy. I encourage everybody to do this. 12, 13, 14 years old. That's not your child. Ask a Black boy, where you want to be in 5 years? I almost can guarantee he's going to say, I don't know. That's a damn problem. Because if I ask Indian, boy, not native, indigenous Indian, but like an Indian from India, or if I ask little Timmy around the corner from my house, or if I ask a little Latino boy what they want to be doing, they're gonna have some concept of it. I'm a professor. I teach on a community college level, and I do that deliberately because I could go teach on a big academic level as well. But I do it deliberately because I have access to people who don't always get the type of education that they should get or the type of influence or role modeling that they can have. So I
Mhm.
get in contact with a lot of Black students on a community college level. And when I compose them to my Somali students, when I compose them to a lot of my white students, when I compose them to a lot of my Asian students, the disposition on where they're going with their education is missing. So they see a man like me, and I'm like, look, you are here to do something. You ain't just here to get a degree, because that's where most of them, I'm just here to get a degree, because that's what I'm trying to make my mama happy or whatever. I'm trying to figure out,
Mhm.
I'm trying to get
Mhm.
more money in my life. You need to have a focus, right? What are you going to do with this degree? Because my Asian student, I'm doing this because I'm about to go to get this certificate so I can be this radiologist, and then from there I'm going to start this business. Like they are on it. My Somali students, same thing. I'm here because my cousin's doing this and my uncle's doing that. We're about to start this place. Boom! Like they're thinking forward. They have plans forward. Black men have plans for today. That's trauma, right? So we have to be able to give a focus to what we want to do. And that again goes to our mental health, because when you ask the question about do are most Black men traumatized, I say yes, because we take things moment by moment. That's what trauma does. We have to
Mm.
shake that. We have to shake that so we can build a better community, and think more focused and be more intentional with what we're trying to do. So when we talk about developing the community, our mental and emotional health definitely goes into it, because if we don't develop our mental emotional health and we don't oppose our environment, we're going to continue to get the results that we get. We have, when we talk about violence in the community or dysfunction, or men having babies and dipping out, all those things are there because men aren't in control of the environment. There's no standard, there's no boundary put on us culturally. Everybody's just doing what they want to do, and it's kind of like the wild wild west, and we have to change that before we disappear. Because if we keep going like this, it's not sustainable. Like we're gonna just end up, blending into everybody else's culture and being gone. That's what I think could happen. So
So, wow. You said a mouthful.
yeah, I
And I
mean,
think
it's
that
a big answer.
no, but yeah, well, no, it's not only a big answer, Brandon, but the question is, as Mr. Fuller says, man, no matter how you feel, is it true?
Yeah.
It doesn't like your feelings don't matter. Is it true? And then
Mm.
if it's true, it's kind of like, okay, it's literally, I was having a conversation with a client. Actually, I can use this example. We were talking about credit, and she was complaining about all these things that happened and why her credit was bad. And I'm like, we're just going through it. And I said, look, the wall is there.
Right.
When you complain about the wall ain't moving.
Right.
It's still there. It's the
It's there.
wall is still the wall is still there. So we either have to try to figure out a strategy or to implement a plan to climb over the wall or kick it down. But if
Right.
you can complain, you can just blame Pookie, Ray, however everybody you want to blame. It doesn't matter. When you
Right.
turn back around, the wall's still going to be there. And that's really what I want to talk about. What I really wanted to get to is that, have we had all these systematic things? Of course we have. Have we
Yes.
had detrimental things? Of course we have. Do we have trauma? Of course we have. Guess what? It's our job to work through it. It doesn't matter. We have to work through it. That doesn't mean we're insensitive to problems, because at the
Right.
end of the day, me developing into a better person than I am today, my problems and my insecurities were still there. I have to
Right.
work through them. And as a community, we have to put this stuff on the table. These are uncomfortable conversations,
Yeah.
particularly as men. And listen,
Yes.
I know we don't do everything wrong. I know that for a fact. It doesn't matter because it's our responsibility. It's like I love sports analogies, but like LeBron gets to be the king, and he also gets to be the court gesture at the same time. Because
Mm.
if they lose, it's his fault.
Yes.
If they
Yeah.
win, you get the
It's his
credit.
fault. Right.
So this is what comes with the territory. But all the
Right.
moaning, and it's like, look, we here. We got to fix the problem. That doesn't mean that we don't acknowledge what they are. Of course,
Mm-hmm.
we know that we have issues. There's issues on the men's side. There's issues on the women's side. But if all of our results as a collective fall a lot on us, then we have to take the responsibility about what can we do to be better. And we have to make some critical decisions. So no, I really like what you explained. I really like how you explain that. Really like
Absolutely. Yeah, man. I mean, it's a lot of work. And I don't want it to sound so doom and gloom because
it's
I do
not
have
doom and
hope.
gloom. Yeah, it's not doom and gloom. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a lot of hope for us, but we have to be honest about what's happening. There's no other society of people, collective of people, where the men aren't working in an organism. They're not working that are not working collectively, but the black community. And if we look at the black community, that's why we struggle. Now I understand that there are different types of black people in the black community. And the ones that are doing well, the men are better organized. So I look at it as what's the common denominator. And when I look at other ethnic groups and I see how their men work collaboratively, even when they have trauma, they
That's
still
very,
work together.
very true. That right there, Brandon. They don't like each other, but this is about the group.
Yes. Like look at a lot of Islamic folks, right? All that crazy shit that's going on all over the Middle East. You think that's not trauma? You get a damn bomb blown up
all
here.
Of it is trauma.
You got kids walking around with AK-47s, but the men are still organized and they still figure out a way to have civilization. Like that is, we have to think about that. Because we can create fancy titles like Chirac, but Chirac looks very different than Iraq. When you look at cultural functionality, it is very different. And we are very self-destructive as black men. We will kill ourselves slowly, which is called menticide, or we will end up just being homicidal to one another. We have to break that psychology. Dr. Amos Wilson talks about it all the time. He talks about black annihilation in service of white domination. If black folks stop doing the dysfunctional things that we do, this country would have to adjust financially
immediately.
Like seriously, we have to adjust financially. So if we really want to talk about dismantling white supremacy and things like that, all we have to do is really get serious about developing our community and doing things differently, and you'll start to see how this stuff also functions. We won't have to talk about the school to prison pipeline if we just stop doing some of the crazy shit that leads to it. Like seriously, literally, if we said that, if that's the goal, we don't want no more black kids going to prison by 2035, we could make that happen. Because you don't have tons of Asian folks, Hmong, Filipino, Chinese, Vietnamese, going to prison. They ain't doing it. You don't have to do that. We can literally dismantle that system in ourselves, and then we'll really see what type of racist behavior folks have, because now we're functioning in an element that we can't be criminalized, victimized, and dominated and saying, well, see, that's their culture, because we ain't doing that no more. But it's hard for us to do it. Go ahead.
No. I was going to say, man, when I first got less, I call it less confused. When I got less confused, the first thing that I used to see was my kids used to play AAU basketball. And this is a really great example. And I remember I was sitting in a tournament one day, Brandon, and I'm looking in the gym. There's 500 black males running around in this gym, just playing basketball. And I started saying to myself, is this the most constructive use of their time? That's all I kept saying was, is this for the issues and the problems that we have as a community? The men that were there, you see what I'm saying? Like,
I do.
The men that were there, and some guys I know, and you criticize it. Nah, bro, but listen to what I'm saying. Is this the most constructive use of our time? If you're playing a football game, and let my girl like the Jets. The Jets have been playing the Patriots for 20 years. The Patriots have been whooping the Jets every year. The Jets can't lie to themselves about what the results of the game are. Every time you play the Patriots, you lose.
Right.
The Jets don't get to go into the game and say, we won last week. Nah, bro, you lost. You lost the game. I think we have to develop a balance between having the confidence to attempt to solve these problems and win, and also be very self-aware of where we are in the game, because those two things can exist at the same time. If you're constructing a basketball team and you play the team across town and they whoop you every year, you're sitting there saying the goal is I have to figure out a strategy on how to beat them. I got to get new talent. We got to run a new play. We got to get some new training. We got to do whatever. We've been running the same play forever, and it's not working based upon the results. So all I'm saying is that we kind of have to look how we're doing things. I know I can speak. I have a son that's about to graduate high school. Graduate high school, and also I have another son that's about to graduate college. I have, and my ex, we have done okay, but I can tell you, Brandon, stop emphasizing sports. Critically.
Yes.
Don't stop talking about it all the time. They probably don't even realize it. Talk a little bit more about business, talk a little bit more about structure, emphasize a little bit of discipline. And I've seen some small, subtle changes, but and I'm not comparing, but I see so many people focusing on sports, and it's really good. And it's a really great avenue, but we put a lot of focus and emphasis on that, and that may not be the best constructive use of our time based upon our results. I could be wrong. If everybody going to play football and run into each other is going to solve the problem, we would have already had this problem solved.
Absolutely.
So it's not a one-off answer, but I do think we spend a lot of time in these arenas. I'm around a lot of Black men, Brandon.
Yeah.
A lot of us are not talking about family, building businesses, money, mental health. A lot of us are talking about the Cowboys and the Redskins and what's LeBron James going to do.
Right.
Again, that's just real.
Disposition, man. Disposition. That is a channel where it's acceptable for Black men to share space with one another, to argue with one another, to express our emotions is in sports. So we locked in, but we have to be able to branch out beyond that because that's trauma. And that's done deliberately because we don't control sports. So we don't control it, but we funnel you through that. You stay stuck in there. It's just like a child, man. If you can literally steer the direction you want your child to go in. If you don't have 100%. You can never buy an iPad, never buy a TV. They never touch a screen in their lives. Now they're gonna be disconnected from the world at this point in time, but again, they're gonna be channeled into one particular type of thing, and that's what's happened to us. So when it comes to our mental emotional health, that is a space where we feel somewhat comfortable in dealing with it, but not when it comes to dealing with our own. Talking about other people's.
Yes. So I know we might want to be thinking about wrapping up here, but what are things? There's a brother out there, or there's a Black man. It might even be a Black mom that's sitting out there that wants to encourage her husband, her significant other. Because here's another thing. I have talked to many Black females, and they have recognized, Brandon, some of the trauma that some of their partners or their children are involved, might be having. But they don't even know how to start the conversation about how do I even recommend this. I think it's helpful. I've got a name of someone good that might be a safe place, or there's some men's groups or something. How do we even start to have those conversations with whether you're a Black mom or a Black father, a Black uncle, a Black brother, having those constructive conversations to where we can encourage Black men to get into therapy so we can try to develop healthy brains so we can solve some of these problems.
So I'm gonna let you in on a dirty little secret. Most of the Black men and young boys that I've seen have been by way of Black women who've encouraged them to get help. Most Black men don't just go to therapy on their own.
Okay, good.
Which is why we talk about this.
Yeah, that's dope.
And that's been my experience. Other people may have a different experience, but I like putting percentages on stuff. I would say way over 50% of the Black males that I've helped that wasn't through a program or they weren't court ordered to see me for therapy came by the way of a mom, a girlfriend, an auntie, somebody was like, look, you need to go talk to Brandon. You need to go talk to somebody. I think, and this is why I make content, this is why this podcast is important, is these are good subtle ways to get information and to hint at you need to get some help. Give them constructive information, pass them a video, especially if it's short form. They're more likely to check it out and to think about, okay, what does this mean to me? Because one thing that's important for people to understand is sometimes you're too close to have the influence for somebody to take that next step.
Very true.
Sometimes they need encouragement from somebody else, which is why, from a certain extent, I have issues with Charlamagne's book, but then I don't, because he's trying to get both of them. Well, both of them, to be honest. Well, Shook ones, Yeah. That's a whole other podcast. Because I'm like, yeah, I don't went through the list of the things where I have issues. But Shook Ones, I'll talk about Shook Ones, his second book.
Right.
Instead of Black Supremacy. Shook Ones was a spin on mental health from a hip hop lens. Okay. But for me, I think he missed a few generations because he stayed stuck in a particular era, which is his era, which is fine. But that book probably has encouraged thousands of Black men to actually think about going to therapy.
That's a good point. Right.
So I think that things like that is going to be important. We have a mental health awareness now that's a lot bigger. So I would encourage people to subtly do things. Look at TikToks where people are talking about mental health. Black men, they're Black men on there talking about mental health, dealing with their emotions. Sometimes it's in comic form. Sometimes it's not. Pass those things on and say, you should think about this. Pass on a video. You should think about this. Buy them a book if they'll try to read it. But I think videos are easier because people are more likely to click on it, save it, come back to it. A book will get put on a shelf and collect dust all day. But encourage them. Even make yourself vulnerable too. Say, look, I'm doing this for myself. I think you should do it as well. So sometimes role modeling is important. But I think one of the biggest influences to help Black men or boys get into therapy is by other Black men who've done it. And saying, look, man, I know it sounds crazy. I know it might seem like you're going to be lame for doing this or you soft, but you should try it out because it's helpful. As a Black man who went to therapy and who has done this work for quite some time, that has been a huge catalyst. And when I see young Black men, and I do a lot of mentoring, I have a mentoring call in about an hour. I always encourage the young dudes that I talk to, keep doing this. If we stop talking today, find somebody else to talk to because you're not in this alone. When we're able to share stories about the things that happened, how we've overcame them, that's inspirational. And I think that we need to utilize the celebrities who do it and then also the influencers who do it to kind of introduce it.
Yeah, and I can tell you that the moment that I got serious, because you also have to be serious, but you might not start off serious in the beginning, but the moment I got serious, I started to get around other people that were looking to better themselves and wanted healthy relationships too. And so you're able to create a community of men that, and some of these brothers, I don't even know. I haven't grown up with them. But we all have similar things in common because we want to become the best versions of ourselves and to solve some of these problems in our communities, to be better partners, better fathers, be better leaders, role models, whatever we need to be for our community. But that role modeling thing is very, very important because I know for a fact, me saying I'm in therapy, I'm going to therapy has influenced, I know 2 or 3 guys directly to even say, hey, how's that been working out for you? That's 10 times better than not having the conversation at all. So I look at any sort of progress as great progress and great steps because Rome wasn't built in a day. Right. But I always say we're in a system right now to where it is like the fire alarm is on and we got to get out the building. Because we are in right now, it's very, very intense. Crisis. It's crisis mode, and we have to take this stuff very, very seriously. So first of all, always shout out to Brandon for being one of our great Black mental health professionals out there. But if you're a young man out there struggling with something, there's safe spaces to talk. And we as men, another thing, and I'll end on this, is that I also realize that me going to therapy has also made me more empathetic with people. So Brandon, I'm easier to talk to because I can understand.
Right.
I remember that conversation I had with my homie, and he said, man, you don't need that. If a young man said, hey, Aaron, I'm dealing with something, I'm like, man, tell me about what you're feeling.
Right.
That's a different response, and you don't need that. Right. Because how many times do these young brothers or just young men go to somebody? They might have gone to Uncle Brandon when he was 20, and Uncle Brandon was like, man, bro, you figure that out. Right. As opposed to Brandon saying, man, tell me what you're feeling. What's going on? Right. Hey, man, you know what? Yeah, man, I can recommend you to somebody, or man, I'm glad you shared that with me. Brandon, I can't tell you how powerful even saying those words. I'm glad you shared that with me.
Yep.
It means a lot because some people are not willing to open up, but when they do, we have to make ourselves available. All right, I'm good.
All right. We're going to wrap it up for today. All right. This was another great installment of plenty to come of the Jegna and the Thinker. I am Brandon Jones. He is Aaron Simons, right? Yes.
Simmons. Most people call me A.A. Ron, so that's good.
I don't know why I call you Simons. Because it's two
I
M's.
don't know. Just
Anyway,
make it up. You good.
I'm tripping, man. I'm tripping. I gotta get my co-host name right, man. But anyway, we are out. Peace and love. Take care of yourself at the end of the day. Don't be afraid of therapy, because therapy ain't afraid of you, and neither is trauma. So go ahead and get the help that you need, and we'll see you next time. Peace.
Peace.